Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really powerful idea, this concept of generations of disciplers, how movements actually grow.
Right, and sustain themselves.
Exactly. Our listener wants to get a solid grasp on this, quickly and thoroughly. So that's our mission today.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be digging into this idea of spiritual multiplication, spiritual reproduction, and its potential. We're looking at insights from people like John R. Mott, Andrew Murray.
Dawson Trotman, Robbie Butler, a few different perspectives.
That's right. Each brings a unique angle to it.
And look, whatever your background is with this, we want to make it clear, useful, keep the jargon down. Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we start? The power of multiplication itself.
I think so. John R. Mott, he put it really well. He said, "He who does the work is not so profitably employed as he who multiplies the doers."
That really frames it, doesn't it? It's not just about doing.
It's about enabling, multiplying the effort, creating that ripple effect.
It's like leverage. And Andrew Murray, way back in 1902, he kind of painted a picture of this, didn't he?
He did. It really makes you stop and think. He worked out that if one person won one other person to faith each year,
Okay.
and that new person did the same thing the next year and so on,
Uh-huh.
well, theoretically, the whole world could be reached in about 32 years.
32 years, wow. What are your thoughts on that kind of, exponential growth?
Well, it sounds almost unbelievable on paper, right?
Yeah.
But it does show the inherent power in that person-to-person connection, and crucially, the equipping part.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is Dawson Trotman, you mentioned him, founder of the
You're only
Navigators.
based on knowing Christ, making him known.
Exactly. He took Murray's idea, this was in the 1950s, and pushed it further. He calculated, what if this reproduction happened every 6 months?
Okay, faster.
Yeah. Then the timeline shrinks dramatically, down to just 16 years.
16 years, it almost feels too fast.
Yeah.
But I guess the principle, the compounding is sound.
It really underscores the potential speed if you focus on multiplying the multipliers.
So we see this huge theoretical potential, but let's make it practical. How did someone like Jesus actually, build his movement? Did he use this?
That's a really crucial question.
Yeah.
And yeah, his strategy wasn't trying to personally meet every single need out there.
Right.
Instead, his core method was investing deeply, really pouring into a small group, his disciples.
With the expectation they'd pass it on.
Absolutely. With the clear expectation that they would reproduce what they'd learned, what they'd experienced with him. Mark's gospel puts it plainly. He appointed 12 that they might be with him,
Okay, relationship first.
and that he might send them out to preach and have authority. So there's the mission aspect right there.
So it wasn't just about their own individual spiritual growth, like in a bubble.
Exactly. I mean, their personal development was vital, no doubt. But the primary goal wasn't only getting the 12 to some perfect level of maturity for themselves.
Or just understanding things intellectually.
Right. Or even just deepening their love for him and each other, though that happened. From the very beginning, you see it in Matthew 4, calling Peter and Andrew.
The fisherman.
Yeah. He says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." The mission, the reproduction, was baked in from day one.
That's a key distinction. They were apprentices, learners, and future leaders right from the get-go.
Precisely.
And didn't he start with a community? It wasn't just isolated individuals.
Good point. Yeah, 4 friends, 2 sets of brothers initially. He didn't just pick 12 random people and train them separately. He built a community.
Why was that important?
Well, they could learn from each other, couldn't they? Practice what he was teaching, see it work, support each other, hold each other accountable, all within that shared life and mission.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about this word discipleship. It can mean different things to different people. Robbie Butler's experience sheds some light here.
It does. It's quite interesting. Butler apparently had this conversation with Dave Browning, and he sort of confessed he didn't feel like he'd ever been traditionally discipled. The weekly meeting, the curriculum.
The common picture, maybe?
Yeah. But Browning pointed something out. He said, "What about all those years working alongside Dr. Ralph Winter at the U.S. Center for World Mission?"
Ah, so discipleship through doing, through mission.
Exactly. Browning framed that intense side-by-side work on a shared task, in their case, focusing on unreached peoples as a really profound form of discipleship.
That's quite different from what Butler called the superficial stereotype, right? That weekly meeting focused only on personal growth through a study.
Totally different. Butler's story highlights this richer idea of peer discipleship, learning and growing together, almost organically, while you're focused on a common mission.
How long was he there?
He spent 24 years at USCWM from 1980 to 2004, and he said he learned constantly from Dr. Winter, from others, through all the different projects, the meetings, the challenges. And that whole environment nurtured his own faith, his love for Jesus, and gave him this passion to get others involved. He actually wrote down 34 key lessons he learned just from Winter's approach.
So it was less about formal classes, more immersion in the mission. Learning by doing, by observing.
That seems to be the essence of it. And this realization made him rethink some other ministry approaches he'd seen, or maybe even done himself.
Like the hit-and-run idea Dr. Winter mentioned?
Yeah, that's a pretty blunt term, isn't it? But Winter used it to describe a certain style.
What did that look like? How would you describe hit-and-run ministry?
Well, basically, you meet someone, maybe at an event or something. You try to give them as much information, as many resources as you possibly can in that short time.
Kind of overload them?
Maybe. And then you move on to the next person, the next event. There's no real expectation of ongoing connection or follow-up or development.
Like a quick download, then good luck.
Something like that. And it raises a huge question, is that really the most fruitful way? Just pouring everything you can into as many individuals as possible in these isolated moments.
It made Butler question things, look for something more sustainable.
It definitely challenged his thinking.
Yeah.
Prompted him to ask if there wasn't a better way, a more fruitful model than just, hit and run.
And this connects to the idea of needing to slow down sometimes, focusing more intentionally. You mentioned the book Margin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Richard Swenson's book Margin. Initially, Butler kind of reacted against that idea, creating intentional space, slowing down. It felt almost counterproductive given the urgency of the mission.
Felt like less time for ministry.
Sort of. But then a big personal event shifted his perspective. His third child was born with Down syndrome. And that experience really forced him to confront what he called his addiction to pursuing exciting opportunities ahead of taking care of basic responsibilities, especially towards his family.
That's quite a realization. And it ties into this idea that God might value our sensitivity, our obedience, more than just frantic activity.
Exactly. He started understanding Romans 12.2 differently, being transformed by renewing your mind to discern God's will. He saw how constant busyness, chasing every opportunity, can actually crowd out that vital connection.
Less time to listen.
Right. Less time to really listen to discern God's leading. He realized the importance of learning to walk by faith, trusting God's wisdom, not just running on our own steam trying to meet every need we see.
Okay, so slowing down, listening better. How does this connect back to making disciples who make disciples? Greg Ogden's work comes in here.
It connects directly. Ogden's book, Transforming Discipleship, makes some really key points. One is you can't just slap the label discipleship onto a classroom lecture or one-off event and expect it to work like real discipleship.
Just calling it that doesn't make it so.
Precisely. And crucially, Ogden argues that true discipleship must be reproducible. The person being discipled needs to be equipped to then go and disciple someone else effectively.
So it's built for multiplication.
Yes. He stresses that we can and should intentionally structure our ministries to cultivate these generations of disciples. And the payoff, investing in discipling a few who multiply yields far greater long-term fruit than trying to personally minister to crowds.
Okay, so it's not just about passing information along, it's equipping people to equip others.
Exactly. Which brings in another vital piece, guided experience and coaching. Jim Downing from the Navigators, again, really emphasized this to Butler.
What was Downing's point?
That information transfer alone isn't enough. People need hands-on guided experience. They need coaching to actually develop the skills, the confidence, the heart, really, to reproduce.
Makes sense. You can't learn to swim just by reading a book about it.
Good analogy, yeah. And this led Butler and Downing to look closely at real-life ministries. RLM.
What were they doing?
RLM. They're known for their disciple-making focus. They developed a very intentional system for coaching their small group leaders. They see these leaders as spiritual parents. And the goal is to coach these parents so they can effectively multiply reproducing disciples within their groups. RLM realized it's crucial to get every member growing towards that reproducing maturity.
And they provide coaching for the coaches, essentially.
Yes, ongoing coaching for the small group leaders. They even use the term spiritual grandparenting sometimes.
Spiritual grandparenting, I like that. It really captures the multi-generational vision.
It does, doesn't it? It makes it clear you're not just aiming for the next generation, but for a continuous multiplication down the line.
And David Platt, his Follow Me series, touches on this too.
Yeah, Platt makes a powerful point there. He highlights how Jesus seemed to assess his own life's work, his success, if you like, based on his investment in the 12.
Not on the size of the crowds he drew.
Exactly. Not the miracles, not the sermons primarily, but his investment in those few who would carry it on. It's a totally different metric than we often use today.
That really reframes things. What about the training for trainers movement, T4T? That gets mentioned as having significant results.
It really has. T4T is basically a church planting strategy, but it's built entirely around equipping people who can then immediately train others to plant churches.
So rapid training and deployment.
Yeah, and the growth has been pretty remarkable. Some estimates suggest around 140,000 new house churches, maybe 1.7 million baptisms, in a relatively short period in some areas.
Wow, that's compelling evidence for this multiplication model.
It is, but the sources are careful to point out it's not just about spending more time with fewer people.
Okay.
And it's not just about focusing on leaders who are good at passing on information or curriculum.
So what's the extra ingredient?
The key seems to be the intentional combination of guided experience, coaching, and training. It's about actively bringing people alongside you in the work.
Enlisting them.
Yes, enlisting them, and then providing that ongoing coaching to help them become effective disciplers themselves. Butler even describes his own experience as being discipled by peer coaching through decades of opportunity to get in the game.
Learning through doing, with guidance. This feels very different from just working through a book together.
It's a significant shift away from what you might call content-only or purely curriculum-driven models.
What's the weakness of those models?
Well, they often lack adaptability, don't they? Real life isn't a neat curriculum. And crucially, they miss the modeling aspect, the personalized coaching based on what that specific person needs. Sound teaching is vital, of course, but just dumping information doesn't automatically make someone a disciple maker.
So what does this coaching-focused approach actually cultivate in people? What's the fruit?
It fosters things like a real hunger for God's word applied to life, the ability to hear and obey his voice in practical situations, a genuine desire to live for him, trusting his provision, embracing his purpose, his community.
More holistic growth.
I think so. It's like learning to drive again.
Yeah.
Reading the manual is helpful, essential even. But you only really learn when you get behind the wheel with a good coach next to you, guiding you, helping you learn from your mistakes, encouraging you. It's learning together.
And when you scale this up, this coaching for reproduction, the potential impact is huge.
It really is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Those calculations from that 1900 student missionary conference, the ones Murray quoted.
The 31 or 32 years to reach the world?
Yeah. Even if it's theoretical, it shows the staggering potential locked up in consistent spiritual reproduction.
Which brings us right back to Dawson Trotman's conviction.
That the world can only truly be reached when our spiritual reproduction rate matches or exceeds population growth. It's a profound challenge.
Okay, so we understand the principles, we see the potential. How do we actually do this? How do we move from theory to practice in our own lives, especially with all the pressures we face?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the sources acknowledge it's tough. Culture pulls us in other directions. That's why community is so vital for encouragement, accountability, shared learning.
And Robbie Butler suggests some practical steps, doesn't he?
He does. Based on his experiences in learning, he proposes 3 concrete things people could try.
Okay, what are they?
First, commit to consistent time, daily or weekly, just being in God's presence. Not just talking at him, but listening, trying to understand his agenda for your day, your week.
Step 1, listen to God. Makes sense.
Step 2, set up a regular, maybe monthly, 3-hour meeting with a small, committed group. This could be family, close friends, colleagues, maybe tuples.
3 hours. What happens in that time?
The focus is intentionally planning and praying for how each person in that group is going to reach out, disciple others, and crucially, train them to become disciplers too. Even suggests adapting the T4T format for this.
Like a focused planning and prayer huddle.
Exactly. And rotating leadership, maybe having each person share insights from something they've read, like an article from Mission Frontiers magazine, to keep learning together.
Okay. Listen to God, meet intentionally with a small group. What's the third step?
The third step is multiplication again. Encourage people in your group to invite others to start their own similar monthly teams.
Spreading the practice.
Right. And then, maybe once a month or so, have all these little teams gather together, share what they're learning, challenges, successes, again, rotating who leads, keeping it participatory.
So it builds outwards naturally. These sound like really tangible steps someone listening could actually consider.
They are. And even just the idea of peer coaching groups,
Yeah.
people who are actively trying to disciple others, meeting for a few hours a month to support and learn from each other, that could be huge.
The key seems to be intentionality.
Absolutely. Being intentional about sharing tasks, deliberately enlisting and coaching others in whatever sphere of influence you have.
Yeah.
It comes back to genuinely loving and caring for the people God puts in our path and investing in them so they can become spiritually mature and fruitful themselves.
It really changes the focus from just, say, staffing our own visions or programs, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
There's often this tendency, especially maybe in the West, to think the answer to ministry challenges is always finding more staff, more resources to run our thing.
Right. The manpower problem?
Oh, yeah. But what if we really followed Jesus's model? Investing deeply in a few, coaching them for generational reproduction. Maybe that whole manpower problem we talk about just disappears, or at least looks very different.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the central idea really seems to be that focusing on multiplying the disciplers, not just on our own individual activity, holds this incredible potential for broad, lasting impact.
That's the core of it. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty provocative thought to mull over.
What's that?
Think about the people already in your life, your family, your close friends, your work colleagues. How could you start investing in their growth more intentionally?
Not just for their own sake.
Right. Not just for their benefit, but seeing them as potential multipliers.
Yeah.
People who could then go on to impact others in ways you never could alone.
Mhm.
What if the most effective thing you can do isn't trying to do more yourself?
But empowering others to do even more.
Exactly. What if that's the real key?
That's definitely something to think about. We really hope this discussion has given you some valuable insights. We encourage you to reflect on these ideas, see what resonates, maybe check out some of the resources mentioned, missionfrontiers.org, or the books by Murray, Trotman, Ogden, Platt, Swenson.
Yeah, dig deeper where it sparks your interest. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We trust it's been helpful and maybe sparked some new ways of thinking about impact and reproduction.